So we talk a lot about what do we need to do to get better leads. We talk about what do we need to do to take better care of our client. But now we've got the client, we've got the conversation, we're ready to move forward, right? Here. What we need to talk about now is the relationship between you and the other realtor on the other side of the table. It's negotiation time. And if you don't know how to negotiate and you don't know how to represent yourself well and better represent the client, you're going to end up in a real back and forth every single time that you try to submit something as simple as a contract. And no, that's not where it starts and ends. Whenever we're talking about contract language and contract communications and how we pre-negotiate before the first round of paperwork, and how we negotiate throughout the different milestones of the transaction, are all going to be critically important to your success. So what we're going to talk today is about some of the real estate strategies that I have learned over the years, as well as quoting from some of the pros. I am not the only living, breathing real estate agent out there, and I want to make absolutely sure that I'm recognizing the successes of those that have been in the business as long or much longer than me and that have had a lot of success. So real estate negotiations itself sounds very easy on paper, but in practice, even the smallest mistakes that you make can sink the deal, kill the relationship, and stop communications. You need to understand the psychology, the strategy, and the shifting market trends to get the best outcome from your client. And this is not easy. This is why we decided to update guides and trainings and everything on a today basis, because what we're talking about this afternoon is what's going to make the real estate negotiations in the current market important. Not as a 35,000 foot approach, but what's happening in the market today and how we should be addressing it. One of my favorite people to follow on the internet is obviously Mr. Ryan Serrant. He's certainly one of the gems. He came up in certain very difficult real estate markets. He developed his own strategies, and ultimately he is all about the hustle. But his favorite negotiating standard is the 3 Ps: the push, the pull, the persist. When you're talking about negotiations, by following push, pull, and persist, it's going to help you have the options as the discussions progress or regress. For example, we push information, we push data, proactive help, understanding, and listening. The most important of all of those, right? We persist relentlessly in our pursuit of getting to the yes, getting to an agreement, both sides being able to move forward. And then, yes, we can pull. We can also pull the deal away. And whether you're selling a home for $1 million, $3 million, or $250,000, the minute the buyer likes it, every other agent's going to run to write an offer. Sometimes being the boldest is going to pay off when it comes to these kinds of things. And my biggest successes for my clients and how my business has been run is the power of understanding that the winner in a negotiation is the one that's not afraid to walk away. You can sometimes pull into your strategies. This is going to work really well with buyers and sellers in just about any market. But in addition to that, it's good as a broker and as an agent to demonstrate that you just don't want to rush into any deal just for the sake of building some paperwork, just because the client always feels like this is the house I have to have. You want to make the best deal for them. You want to negotiate according to what the market stability is going to accept, according to what the market flows are going to appreciate in conversation. So taking the deal sometimes away is what you're going to have to do to create that urgency on both sides of the table to get the deal done and for the relationship with your client as well. One of my favorite strategies has always been to just set appropriate expectations. During negotiations, one of the most effective combinations is managing the expectations and practicing discretion. For most buyers, I like to run through the scenarios, anticipate the seller moves, staying one step ahead in the negotiation, essentially forming my strategy in advance. I like to keep the buyers informed of here's how I'm going to play today. Here's what I'm going to do. Here are the pieces on the chessboard that I plan to move. I will not move them faster. Time is to my advantage. Time is to our advantage, regardless of market speed. It is important that you are not just throwing paperwork as fast as humanly possible. And the primary reason for that is because speed encourages mistake. I like to keep the details about the buyer and the seller to a minimum to avoid tripping into the hand of becoming biased about anything other than the property. Similarly, for my sellers, I like to prepare them for the reality of lower than expected offers occasionally, potentially inspection issues. Hey, make sure to pop into that video from a couple of weeks ago. I've got it linked here in the session so that you can get to it easier, but you need to understand that all of these other classes that lead up until today, if you haven't talked to the buyer, built the relationship, done your paperwork properly, built the conversations around each of your partners and your vendors that you're going to be working with, if you don't have the trust and the understanding of your client, whether you're on the seller or the buyer's side, none of this is going to matter. Because if you can't get to that point, you're never going to have the contract to negotiate. So these other listings and these other buyer presentation classes that we've done are critically important that you use those as a prerequisite. So simply put, back to my sellers, I like to include all considerations in the net sheets and set responsible expectations. The reason for that is it's going to keep them from running amok and wondering what's going to happen next. Essentially, it equips them to handle the twists and the turns of the negotiating process, leading more to what I consider more successful outcomes for all parties involved. And yeah, that means that client, I'm not going to call you every single time I pick up a phone and say, here's what they said. What do you want me to say? I'm the professional. You need to trust me in knowing what I'm doing and that I have your best interest at heart every time I open my mouth. I'm representing us as a team. No, I will absolutely not call you every time the conversation changes. My objectives with you are clear, and I'm going to have the negotiating acumen to get us there. Or I'm going to call and tell you it's time to pull away because they're not talking with us appropriately. Brings us to emotions, right? You need to keep your emotions in check during negotiations, especially. Anger, number one. Anger is weakness on the negotiating table all day. And if you can't find a poker face, buying and selling real estate is going to be difficult for you. Stop whining about it. Stop complaining. Don't pout, curse, get angry. Don't pace around, storm out of a meeting. None of that works. This isn't reality TV. Things happen. If you want to become stronger, if you want to become a nationally accredited negotiator, you need to make sure to learn how to keep your poker face, no matter what the other side is throwing at you. Some people are going to handle themselves poorly, and you can take full advantage of that. There's nothing I like more than the other side of the table getting ruffled, deciding that they're going to push the conversation around. They're going to tell you how this is going to go. It's actually part of my favorite part of the game. They need to know that this is going to end badly for them and for their transaction. Knowing how to handle these kind of things going in and being prepared to let interesting people and the way they handle themselves roll off your back, do it with a smile. It's part of the job. You'll appreciate it in the long run. And hell, like I said, it's one of my favorite parts of the game. Next, let's talk about basing your negotiations on market value, not just the asking price. This is a tough one for a lot of agents, right? They go into the MLS, or worse, they get a lead from Realtor or from Zillow, and they are still in a position where they're having to constantly talk themselves through things. It's tough. They haven't built the rapport. They haven't built the relationship. So when I am looking at a property and for my client's benefit, the most important thing that I can do is make sure I did an appropriate CMA. I knew what the market was doing. I know, regardless of what they're asking for this house, that is not necessarily the number that's going to end up on my offer sheet. My strategy is going to be calculate the value of the property. This, rather than the asking price, is going to be the starting point for my negotiation. It may require an offer above the present market value. In a hot market, this is going to get things under contract quickly and efficiently. I will probably ask for other concessions, but not at ruining the negotiation. the seller client deserves to get paid what their house is worth. And again, because not all real estate agents are created equally, it's important for you to realize that in most conditions and in most situations, there may be only one realtor at the table that really fine-tuned their craft. I like to consider myself being one of those. Many people want to try to go in and lowball. They think that is how they get a deal and that is how they get the best break on price. I'm here to tell you 9 times out of 10 that offer will not be accepted, and it sets the tone for negotiations at a flat, and it's going to be really difficult for you to dig out of it. That it is the smoking hole method. You've lit a match, you've blown a hole in the ground, and now you've got to dig up instead of being on level ground on both sides. It doesn't reveal anything about the seller's position. It's going to put you in a position where they're just consistently negative. And I prefer to handle it different, right? Certainly, it is okay to come in either a little below so that you can see what the position is of the seller. But if you're smart and if the home is at value on their asking price, then going in with a concession is a better approach. That way you're not arguing about the price of the home. You're discussing and negotiating against the common net value, and that changes things. The seller is forced to decide to accept a little less on the net, but they are going to feel confident in they got their pricing, their agent represented them well, they got what was expected on the house. If you go in too low, it's going to force counter aggression. It's not going to put you in a position of strength. It's going to make them think you don't have a strong buyer. Either they don't have the money to buy this house, or worse, they're just a let's make a deal kind of person. And unless they get this huge discount, they're not going to follow through all the way to the end. And remember, we got a lot of milestones before we get to the end of this transaction. If you're already starting off lowballing or trying to crush it at the very intro of the negotiating strategy, what do you think is going to happen when we get to inspection, appraisal, finalization of the paperwork at the Alta? Whenever we see final numbers, these are all going to turn into boxing matches. And most, and I mean this, most sellers simply aren't interested. So make sure that you open negotiations, you open communications, and you make sure you're putting both sides of the table at ease that this is simply just part of the process. Records. For God's sakes, we need to keep better records. We as agents have responsibilities with our license to maintain record keeping. And yes, agents, you don't want to hear this part, but even when negotiations fail, you still want to keep appropriate notes. Use your CRM. It makes it easy. If you can send back and forth a few emails with per our conversation, even if negotiations falter, you can put that in line and follow up in a week saying, hey, I realize our negotiations didn't go as expected. However, we are still interested a week later if the house is still on the market. Since listing agents can have very different negotiating styles, it is crucial to keep the notes on every single listing agent you work with.